Are we good, everybody? Any other mic? All right.
There it is.
You got it?
No, I know something.
I don't know. I got nothing. Well, let's go, right? Hey, everybody. My name is Kristen Lyerly, and I am running to represent the people of my home district where I was born and raised here in Northeast Wisconsin, Wisconsin's 8th. I'm here today as a mom and a doctor and someone who is deeply concerned about the people of Northeast Wisconsin. I'm concerned about Project 2025. And based on the conversations that I had over Labor Day weekend with friends in Chilton and Shawano and Green Bay, I'm not alone. People are really worried about this. This plan, drafted by over 140 of President Trump's former employees and advisors, is frankly entirely scary. It concentrates power in the office of the presidency, defeating the checks and balances that our founders created. It undermines what we all care about, our freedom. Literally everything is at stake here. Education, the climate, labor, healthcare. I could go on and on, but I won't. That's why my friends are here. So I'm going to set this giant book down. Oh, try not to drop it. Okay. And I'll hand things off to my friend, Greg Sampson. Come on up, Greg.
All right. Thank you.
Go ahead and introduce yourself and
I
tell
will.
us where you're from.
You bet. My name is Greg Sampson. I represent the 5th Assembly District. 5th Assembly District includes Little Chute, Kaukauna, and then up north into Brown County, a portion of Brown County. Goes all the way over to the town of Nichols in the furthest corner. It includes about 90% of the beautiful Oneida tribal lands. It also has Freedom and Seymour. So those are kind of the main towns that the area encompasses. I'm here today because one of the things that I've had an opportunity to do in my earlier life is that I was an evangelical pastor. And so when I got involved in this, one of the real clarion calls for me to get off my butt and start doing something was the damage that I saw to sort of our spiritual infrastructure. It's tangible. You see it in nearly every church if you talk to a pastor or a church worker, that this whole Project 2025, and certainly before that, predating that with the Trump administration, has undermined the beauty and the grace and everything that we love about our spiritual communities. So when we're looking for a way to form spiritual community, I think it's a good thing to take our cues from maybe Luke chapter 10, which talks about the wonderful story of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. They have a lot of room in this, but they apparently had no room for that story. So the Cliff Notes version is very simple. Jesus was asked a question by someone: how do you get into heaven? How do I gain eternal life? And he said, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor the same. And the response that the gentleman had was, who is my neighbor? And so here we are with a big portion of this talking about immigration. We think about the signs that they held up high just a month ago down at the Pfizer Forum. Mass deportation, mass deportation. Those are the tenets, those are the principles that are in this. And those are not the principles found in Scripture, and certainly not the principles that we want to live our lives by. So that's why, as I represent this district and get to go out and talk to folks, that's why I'm here. So, and I'm going to hand it off to Andy Rich. Thank you.
My name is Andy Rich, and I am the Democratic candidate for the 12th Senate District. The 12th Senate District is a little bit large. I call it most of the Northwoods. If you know where Wausau is, and you drew a line all the way north to the Upper Peninsula, and then you drew a line all the way east to just north of Green Bay, that whole top 20% northeast corner of the state only has a 33rd of the population, and we are a very rural district. We are known for our rural values, loving our neighbors, caring about one another, taking care of one another. We come from communities where we have to borrow and help our neighbors often because we don't have the convenience of running down the block to find whatever commodity we are at a shortage of. So values are real big in rural northeast Wisconsin. And one of the biggest problems that I've got in my hometown that caused me to run for office was the fact that our representatives are putting corporate profits ahead of our health and safety. I'm from a city called Marinette. We are the third largest PFAS contamination site in the entire nation. And as much as I would love to tell everybody that this isn't affecting you, I would be lying. Our Republican-led legislature is failing to set common sense regulatory limits on these toxic chemicals so that we can start cleaning up this problem. In other states that have set regulatory limits, they're finding that animals eating crops grown on contaminated farm fields are too toxic for human consumption. Yet in my community, which is the third largest contamination site in the nation, we have tens of thousands of acres of contaminated farmland, and we're not even testing. So we're distributing these goods around the state and the nation to unsuspecting people, and we have no way of protecting ourselves because we're not looking for it. Project 2025 wants to take this bad situation and make it worse. They want to eviscerate the EPA, which is our only help right now because they recently passed 2 of these chemicals under CERCLA as hazardous substances, which is finally prompting some action to begin in protecting people from this contamination. If Project 2025 goes into effect and they eviscerate the EPA and they re-evaluate CERCLA designation of hazardous substances, we're back at square one. They want to put this onto the states to regulate, and our Republican legislature has already shown us that they would much rather put corporate profits ahead of the health and safety of you and me and all of our neighbors. So I recommend in November that you vote like your life depends on it, because it does. With that, I'll hand it off to Renee.
Hi everyone, my name is Renee Populon, and I am running as the Democratic candidate in Assembly District 1. We are the thumb, so all of Kewaunee, all of Dorr, and 15% of Brown County by the Bay. So I'm here to talk today about Project 2025, and it's linked to one of my passions, childcare and human development. We understand how important the mental health and well-being of parents is directly linked to the well-being of children. And we know that programs like the Head Start program provide children who need that critical service a leg up. Project 2025 looks to do away with the Head Start program. So that means 833,000 children and families would be without that service. This service is the one that will catapult these children to understand and learn the way they need to in school. Without this service, their parents can't get to work as well. So that also has an effect, and a negative effect, on the economy. So one of the things we like to do as Democrats is we like to prop up our vulnerable populations and give them a hand up. Project 2025 looks to push them down. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mark Pocan. Oh, I'm sorry, Kristen Langerly.
Just briefly. So there you have it. Our climate, our neighbors, our children, it's already happening. And no one sees that on a more fundamental level than Representative Mark Pocan, who is already seeing House Republicans put this playbook into action. That's the reason we're here today. And now I we'll turn it over to my future colleague. Yes, Representative Pocan.
So this is a big document. This is 920 pages of things that are going to affect every single family in Wisconsin and certainly in northeastern Wisconsin. And I think what you just heard was from the federal level to the state level, this is going to impact everyone's life. This is a roadmap for Republicans, predominantly written by the Trump administration, about 140 Trump officials, including 6 cabinet secretaries and many other appointments he had within his administration. But something he's trying to run from right now. He's saying that he has nothing to do with that. You can't run from something 140 of your staff have written, including current staff that he is currently working with. But as you heard, it's going to affect the environment. It's going to affect workers. It's going to affect our health care. It wants to make every single person, just one example on health care, currently you've paid all your life in Social Security and Medicare. It would make you go into a privatized Medicare plan, every single person. And that's the sort of ideas that are in here. There's a reason why Donald Trump wants to run from it. He wants it to be the roadmap for his administration, but no one likes what's in here. And that's why we're trying to go around the state and talk about what's in here and how it'll impact every single person. So in a few minutes, we're going to have a more formal presentation that'll go more in depth on what is all involved. But I'm seeing it right now. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. We have 12 appropriation bills every year. It's kind of the one thing you got to do in Congress, and we're not doing that so well these days. That's why we need some new colleagues. But we're watching them put some of the very elements of this right now into action. So this is real. This is going to be what we're going to see should Donald Trump and the Republicans win, both federally and in the state. And all the more reason why we want to make sure people understand what their agenda is. From every poll I've seen, most of the items that we're going to talk about today are polled at about 30% support, 70% opposition. And that's, again, why they don't want to talk about it. So this is just reality. We're doing everything we can to make sure on November 5th this doesn't come reality, but it's hard to find this book anymore. We had to print it out from a PDF. Because the Heritage Foundation, which was a major sponsor of the Republican convention, had a full-day teach-in on the first day on Monday. They've taken this down. So unless you can find a PDF, there's no way to buy the book anymore because they know they're in trouble. We're hoping that we can make sure everyone in Wisconsin knows what's in here and then make sure that trouble happens, which is electing Democrats in November because it's so important that we get it done. And I'm glad I didn't go to the gym today because I'm doing a little workout here. But with that, why don't everyone wants to come back up. If anyone has questions for any of us, we'd be glad to try to answer any questions. I'm going to put the book back down. And this is for the media, and then we're going to have public questions when we start everything in a little bit. So why don't you come on up here. Thank you very much. So any questions?
Absolutely. So, Representative Pocan, you mentioned that Donald Trump has tried to distance himself from earlier this summer from Project 2025 and claims that he does not know who is behind it. Can you speak to why it's important for you all to bring it up today and to associate him with it, even though in his campaign literature he has claimed to disavow the project?
Yeah, in places like Wisconsin, we call that a lie, right? That he has nothing to do with that. And that's the bottom line. There's 140 Trump administration officials and former appointees who've written parts of this. I mean, there are people who've written chapters from his administration. 6 of his cabinet secretaries have written part of this. Ambassadors that he's appointed have written parts of this. And some of the regulatory agency appointments he made have written parts of this. So there's no way he can escape. 140 of his former staff are involved with this, much less his vice presidential nominee for the main person who's behind this has written the foreword for one of his books. And we just found out recently on a former plan that was put up by the Heritage Foundation, J.D. Vance had supported that as well. So there's no question there's a connection to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Project 2025. And since they're trying to lie about it, our job is to make sure we're telling the truth about it. And whether it be people running for state office, telling you the very real impact that you're going to have at the legislative level, or those of us who are trying to make sure we're representing districts in federal level, This is real. People need to know what they're going to be voting for in November, and don't believe the lies when someone tells you they have nothing to do with it, but 140 of their folks have written it. That tells me volumes.
I also spoke with the Brown County Republican Party, and when I asked them for comment about the event, the town hall that is being held tonight, they claimed that the focus on Project 2025 is somewhat of a fear tactic being used rather than speaking about policies that Democrats are backing come November. Do you have a response to that statement from Brown County Republican?
I do. None of us peddle in fear, okay? What we're trying to talk about is honesty. And what I've seen through and through with this, is there's this campaign of denial. And to sort of project that fear back onto us, like we're the ones doing this, we didn't come up with this. We didn't write the 940 pages that they clearly did. So because they're trying to distance themselves and then also throw, fear our way is ridiculous. This is honesty. I wouldn't be involved in anything that is less than honest. And that's what we're trying to do is tell the truth. This is a bad gamble for me, maybe. You know what I'm saying? This might backfire if I'm super honest, and if I'm going to come out and tell the truth about this. I've already lost friends. I've already lost people who think that I'm some radical and stuff. So the truth is going to stand. Truth and time walk hand in hand, and we're going to find that out with this.
And I think what's radical is what's in here. I mean, for Democrats, we know a lot about Vice President Harris already because she's gotten things done with Joe Biden. In their administration, we passed an infrastructure bill. 4 presidents, Democratic and Republican, talked about it. Only one got it done. That was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We passed the Chips and Science Act to start making things here again, computer chips, creating tens of thousands of jobs across the country. We invested in the Inflation Reduction Act to lower the cost of prescription drugs and out-of-pocket expenses for seniors on Medicare and reduce insulin to $35, as well as lower energy costs by investing in more renewables. And we also got the country out of COVID with the American Rescue Plan, which put money in people's pockets, shots in people's arms, got kids back to school safely, as well as giving the first time we had money go to state and local government. So we know, I think, a lot about Kamala Harris already because we know what she did just in the first 2 years of their administration. This is what they want to do in their first 2 years of their administration. And I'm glad to have that contrasting message any day of the week.
I would also add that as a woman who takes care of women in this country, I am afraid, and my patients are afraid. People will lose access to health care. They will have to pay more for prescription drugs under this plan. They redefined contraception in this plan. That's how granular it gets. So should people be afraid? Absolutely they should be afraid. And they should learn more.
Legislatively and constitutionally, how can some of this stuff that's in this plan possibly be enacted?
Through the legislative process, right? That's the problem. If they would have a Republican Congress, which they currently have with a 4-seat margin, granted, they don't really know how to pass things with a 4-seat margin in the House right now, but should they figure it out? If they have the Senate, which is very possible because of the seats that are up this cycle, and they had the White House, there's really few limits to what they couldn't do in this plan. And that's why it's so important to express to people what exactly is in here, what they're voting for in November. And as much as Donald Trump may say he doesn't know anything about it, we've had some congressional candidates in Wisconsin on the Republican side say they don't know anything about it. How come we all know about it? We all know what's in the plan. They're running from it. And generally, if you're running from a record, that means they know that the public doesn't like it. So we're going to expose them for what they actually are supporting.
Are there some constitutional violations in it, though? From what I've read, it seems like there are some.
I mean, we get 10,000 bills every year in Congress. Last year we passed 27, the fewest since the Depression. So it may not be that everything happens immediately, but there's 920 pages of ideas in here, and it affects a wide scope from, women who want to make their own decisions over their life, from education, abolishing the Department of Education and Head Start, labor, going after the ability to organize and have a union, and to go after contracts, mid-contract, to the environment and going after the EPA and stopping and having clean water in areas that, clearly clean air and clean water are important. they can do little pieces of it and do severe damage. So that's the reality. We just want people to understand it.
And pick away at the checks and balances that are inherently in our system to consolidate power under the presidency. That, to me, is the scariest giant impact here.
Yeah, 50,000 civil servants would get fired, so they put political appointments in, which is unheard of. But if you did that, the damage you would do to institutions right now that are serving our constituents would be very severe.
How would they go about firing them?
It's part of the plan. They would go after and not follow union contracts. There can be no public employee unions anymore. If you remember what Scott Walker did, that's nationalizing Scott Walker's agenda as part of this plan. There's a lot of power grabs that consolidate power into the presidency, and as Kristen said, that's directly going after that check and balance that you have that's so important.
Yeah, Congressman and Dr. Lyerly. Reproductive health care is a big part. I mean, it's part of in the agenda. And speaking of messaging, Donald Trump last week said that he would make IVF under his second administration free to Americans. There weren't a lot of details about, how that would be paid for, implemented, et cetera. But do you worry, him saying things like that, do you worry that that kind of muddles the messaging for voters, even if, maybe the details aren't clear and the intentions aren't clear? Do you worry that that kind of might confuse people?
It absolutely confuses people. But you said it clearly before, Donald Trump lies. And people are starting to understand that. He said no to IVF now. He said yes to IVF. He'll respond to the public in any way that he thinks they want that they want him to respond, so he can sell them something. We know he's against IVF. They voted against IVF. We know that a giant part of his coalition is against IVF. My patients are for IVF. Most of us want the right to be able to build a family and to do it in a safe way that is supported by community. So yeah, Donald Trump lies.
And what's in here and what's the Heritage Foundation supports and what Republican members of Congress have put into appropriation bills go directly after things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and go directly after a woman's ability to make decisions over her own body. And it's already being implemented. So I think the fact that you have a roadmap is probably more important than Donald Trump being his own kind of GPS and telling you what he's going to do, because it's not as permanent. I think this is what we're going to be able to look at to have the best idea of what they would do moving forward.
I want to press a little bit more on contrast between the Democrats and the Republicans in Project 2025, and specifically the policies that you guys would support in case of Renee, Greg, and Andy if you were to be elected, as well as Dr. Lyerly, and you right now, Representative Pocan. This Project 2025 stresses that it's a concrete policy initiative that it was initiated in the 80s to run against the vague fundamentalisms of republicanism. What policies would you guys run against Project 2025 if you were to be elected or re-elected?
I mean, the problem is there's a lot, right? The list would be long. Let me say this. I think a lot of what you saw of the Build Back Better agenda, the President and Kamala Harris got a lot done, but there's more they want to do around child care in particular is really important, the child tax credit. We've got a full agenda that we're going to continue to get things done for the American people, and I think you're seeing the campaigns express that. I think the contrast is this takes away many people's freedoms to make their own decisions and affects their family very directly in so many areas, right? From surveilling women. You have to report all this to the federal government. It has become a big brother, big state concept, along with the power grab and the consolidation of all these positions that we've never seen before. So one, it's a power grab. Two, it's taking all the conservative principles they wanted to get done for years, puts it into here. And three, it takes a real rightward shift on religious extremism, and you're seeing a lot of that in Project 2025.
What you saw at the DNC, the constant focus on freedom, that's such an important theme for us, for all of us. But what we see here is pregnancy surveillance, knowing when people have their periods or had a miscarriage, like that's not normal. So I think that is just one of the many examples. We support public education. They want to eliminate the Department of Education. We support the climate and making sure that we have responsible conservation principles in place and policies in place. They want to eliminate the EPA. I mean, it's thing after thing after thing like that, and over 900 pages of it.
I'm just going to take a quick look at that. I apologize. So we wanted to start the program, so if that's all right, if people have questions, otherwise you can grab us afterwards. But we want to make sure that for the people who have come, we need just a minute or two to set up, and then we'll make sure we present everything and then open it up to everybody for questions and comments. So thank you to the media for being here. Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah.
He is such a
It was a nice day. I know. Nobody else there. No, it was
All right, everybody, welcome to our town hall. I am thrilled. Again, I am Kristen Lyerly. I'm the candidate, the Democratic candidate running for the 8th Congressional District. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by so many of our state and local candidates, but especially Representative Mark Pocan. Mark has been doing incredible work on Project 2025, helping us get the word out. You know, this is a giant document. It's hard to decipher. It's confusing. There's so much terrible stuff in here. And the more we can have these conversations with our friends and with our neighbors, we know that that's the most effective way to get the word out. So we are here today to share some of those key points so you can take that back to the people who you're having coffee with or going to church with, as Greg talked about earlier, or whoever, the people in your life, to help them understand what's at risk here. It's not just an election, it is literally our democracy. So with that, Representative Pocan, take it away.
Thanks for coming out on the day after Labor Day. We know we didn't give you a lot of notice, but I have to go back next week for the next 3 weeks, and we're not actually passing bills, we're just buying time, because we're not going to get the farm bill done, which is due September 30th, so we're going to have to do an extension. We're not going to get the 12 appropriation bills done. Our fiscal year ends September 30th. This is part of the Republican dysfunction that we have in the House that you can get more of in Project 2025. But I will be going back and we'll be dealing with that. What we wanted to do is really share the very perfect, yeah, put it up there, everyone can see it, the very dystopian view that is in Donald Trump's Project 2025, so you really understand what he and the Republican colleagues have. It's a takeover of government, it's concentrating power, it's achieving many of their long-term conservative principles, and it takes a very hardline religious right agenda and rolls back our freedoms and our rights. And I think what we want to do is just show a little bit. This is the document, and I've got a few things marked here, but there's a lot in this 920-page written document. This is the agenda for a second Trump term, and it clarifies what the MAGA extremist Republicans across the country are pushing to have it happen. The authors of this have referred to this as a second American Revolution. All right, so just to give you the idea of the scope of what's in here. So let me, this, by the way, is, if you want, if you take your camera out and just take get it into your, I don't know how to talk about URL, you know what I'm talking about, right? This will take you to the PDF of this. And if you would like to have the PDF of the Project 2025, since they're trying to make it very hard to get, this is the way you do that. So we're going to keep it up here for a second. Hopefully you can get it to bring it up, just touch it, and it'll take you to the very document that we use to print this booklet. So
No, it used to be online. Is it no longer online?
you get the PDF, not the book. You can't find it anywhere. One of my colleagues had it, Shelley Pingree from Maine, and we went to Amazon, and you'll see that cover on a bunch of things in Amazon, but if you look at it, none of them are 920 pages. They're all analysis of it. The actual book has been completely removed, and you cannot find it. So there's a reason, right? All of that's out there, but we want to make sure people have access. And this has threats to our democracy, reproductive freedoms, labor protections, public education, LGBTQI plus rights, the economy, the environment, public health, and more, literally affecting every aspect of American life. So this is an agenda that will concentrate power, as we talked about earlier in the press conference, into the presidency. It achieves long-term conservative principles, and it takes a hardline religious right agenda. Just to give you an idea, the Heritage Foundation, this is a multi-million-dollar effort that this and 100 other groups, it's not just Heritage Foundation, 100 other ultra-conservative organizations have coordinated with Trump and his former cabinet secretaries, advisors, and staff. It's a power grab, and that, I think, is the part that I really want to stress the most. This is taking so many different aspects of our daily lives and of the federal government in particular, and putting the power really coordinating around the presidency in that level. It would strip away rights from Americans and install more MAGA officials at every level of government, and it's the vision that Trump and his right-wing friends have for this country. Trump himself, in trying to run away from this, called this extreme. I agree with Donald Trump on one thing. This is extreme. But when he says he has no idea who's behind it, that statement alone shows the lie, right? Because 140 of his folks, which I'm going to get into in just a second, have been a part of it. So right there, CNN has done analysis, and they are the ones who found 140 people who work for him are involved, just as reported this year. Next slide. Let's see. Okay, so who are the actual authors? This is just a little mini taste of some of the folks, of the 140 people who've done it. And this is going to take a second, but let me go through to show you the depth of all of this. So 6 of his former cabinet secretaries and at least 140 administration alumni have written this, according to CNN. 4 individuals that Trump nominated as ambassadors were also involved, along with several enforcers of his controversial immigration crackdown, including former White House speechwriter Stephen Miller, who I think you may remember how extreme he was. Dozens more who staffed Trump's government positions, hold positions with conservative groups advising Project 2025, including his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. These groups also include several lawyers deeply involved in Trump's attempts to remain in power after the election, including his impeachment attorney, Jay Sekulow, and 2 of the legal architects of his failed bid to overturn the 2020 election, Cleta Mitchell and John Eastman. Finally, in addition to the people who worked directly for Trump, others who participated in Project 2025 were appointed by the former president to independent positions. For example, the Federal Communications Commissioner, Brendan Carr, authored an entire chapter of proposed changes to his agency, and Lisa Correnti, an anti-abortion advocate Trump appointed as a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, was among the contributors. It also was written partially by former HUD Secretary Ben Carson, former Office of Management and Budget Office Director Russ Voigt, former DHS, that's Department of Health Services, official Ken Cuccinelli, and more. So that's just a little bit to understand when he says, I don't know who's behind it. Clearly, I think he knows 140 of his former officials. And just in the last few weeks, ProPublica released a damning report outlining a secret training video that they have for future political appointees of Donald Trump. And on this video, 29 of the 36 speakers in the video worked for Trump in some capacity on his transition team in the administration or on his 2024 presidential election campaign.
Are you saying that Donald Trump is connected to Project 2020?
I think if this were, let's see, they're very close. Yeah, I mean, there's no question. And that's part of what we really want to stress, because the fact that, I don't know about you, but where I live down in Dane County, I've gotten mailers. I've gotten 2 different mailers from the Trump campaign trying to distance himself from Project 2025. You don't do that, right, unless you have that connection, and they're clearly realizing this is a liability. But we want to stress just how deep all of this goes. Further, Project 2025 was published by the Heritage Foundation, which is run by Kevin Roberts. And some reports that emerged in 2022, Trump and Kevin Roberts took a private flight together to a Heritage conference where Trump detailed that he was working with Heritage on some forthcoming policy proposals. Quote, they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do, Trump said at the conference. Similarly, Roberts also has a relationship with J.D. Vance, who wrote the foreword to Roberts' book, Dawn's Early Light. And in the foreword, Vance called Heritage, quote, the most influential engine of ideas for Republicans from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. The ties here, we'll do questions at the very end, if that's all right.
I was just going to comment about the Federalist Society.
Sure, no problem. At the end, any comments or questions? Yeah, thank you, though. Appreciate that. So the ties are inescapable. We just want to make sure people really understand that before I actually go into the details, but it's really important to have that out there. And at the Democratic House, the House Democrats have put together a task force on this, and I serve on that. They took the major caucus chairs, and we're on this, and our job is to do what we're doing today, try to talk about it so that people can really understand the depth of what will happen should the November election look like some of us are afraid it could. So at this point, give me 1 second, because I'm going to read off of this instead of turning and looking at that, but I've got all the slides here. I want to make sure I'm reading the details of what's in here. Here we go. Okay, so here's how some of the major parts of this. It would cut the American Rescue Plan programs that have created or saved 220,000 jobs so far. It would push the 33 million people enrolled in Medicare towards privatized Medicare Advantage. This is really important, and I could go into a rabbit hole, which I will try my best not to, but about half the people are on Medicare Advantage, and when I have town halls, I ask, often people don't know because it says Medicare in the name. Medicare Advantage is actually a private insurance alternative, but it has things like you have to have prior authorization to have health care. So if you're on Medicare, you get care you need. On an Advantage plan, you have to get prior authorization, which millions of claims are denied every single year. And when people appeal them, which not everyone does, 85% of those are overturned. So this is private insurance deciding to delay your care, which could mean death, could certainly mean more of a health issue, and they want every single American to go on this, and you've paid all your life through your paychecks for Medicare and Social Security. Like I said, I give you a little extra on that, but I'm a little obsessed on this subject.
Can I not go down a rabbit hole with you?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Please.
I'm a doctor who practices in a rural hospital, and many of us live in rural communities and depend on healthcare in rural settings. Medicare Advantage is bankrupting our rural hospitals. And we're already seeing rural hospitals close. We saw it in the western side of the state. It's been happening, and this just makes it worse. So if you value your health care in your community, this is not good.
And your money. You paid into it all your life, and now you're going to have big government to tell you what you're going to do on that. It removes civil rights protections, including cutting diversity programs and LGBTQI plus rights. and it will lower taxes for the wealthiest Americans and corporations.
Say that again.
I know you're going to be shocked on that one, but it actually talks about tax policy. Next year, just so you know, is a major year where we do tax policy in 2025. That has to be done by the end of the year. So it is really important. If they're going to extend the Trump tax cuts that cost our national debt $5 trillion, the top 83% of those benefits went to the top 1% of people. And all of that's going to be up for grabs coming in. And this proposal would really extend much of that.
Can we do a quick show of hands? Who wants tax cuts for the rich? Tax cuts for the rich? I'm not seeing any hands.
All right. There you go. All right. Next one. Fires tens of thousands of nonpartisan career civil servants. This is the 50,000. I'm sorry. Yeah, 50,000 people that they want to replace with political appointees, which would be a terrible idea. It weaponizes government by installing Trump loyalists in this partisan takeover of agencies like the FBI, DOJ, the Federal Election Commission, and the Center for Disease Control. It meddles with national security by politicizing security clearances, and it allows for more dark money in our elections. And I'm not going to go deep into this, but there's a whole bunch around election reform that, as you can imagine, makes it harder for people to vote and have the say they should, as we've always had. Let me start now getting into some specific areas. Department of Labor. Now, this I did last week, so you've got a little more on labor. I'm the caucus chair of the Labor Caucus in Congress, so I'm going to give you a little more on this than maybe usual, but I think it's important to share what's going on. It goes after overtime pay and protections. It wants to weaken overtime and get rid of some of the overtime pay protections you currently have. It would allow for employment discrimination. It wants to weaken child labor law protections for kids who work in meatpacking facilities and mines, and it would exempt some businesses from OSHA requirements completely, and it cracks down on unions. And let me go a little more into that. It actually would do what Scott Walker did by banning public employee unions. It would do that federally. It would allow states to ban unions, so they could go after that. It would grant employers the ability to retaliate against union organizers, which is illegal under current federal law. It allows bosses to eliminate contracts mid-term. The whole idea of a contract is a contract, and it would allow you to overturn those, essentially making unions far less able to protect workers. It repeals requirements for federal funded projects to have project labor agreements and pay the prevailing wage in the region. This is a big one because that's part of what we did with the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bills, making sure that if we're going to give federal dollars, and we are to help construction of things, it should be the high road. It should be good paying, family supporting jobs and benefits. And they want to take all that away. And it urges Congress to pass J.D. Vance's bill to let employers create their own sham company-run unions. This is stuff taking us back 80 to 100 years of labor law. So it's what Mexico does. Yeah. In fact, I think we would be behind some third world countries on protections for workers under what's proposed in here. Let's go to healthcare, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of the 920 pages. It refuses to allow Medicare to negotiate the costs of prescription drugs, keeping the cost of life-saving medication high. We did this in the Inflation Reduction Act. They just announced some of the first set of drugs that have come out, and this would stop that from happening. We pay sometimes 20 times more than Canada or Europe for the exact same drugs. And it would not allow us to be able to negotiate for lower drug prices as we are right now through Medicare. It would push to privatize Medicare and move seniors to private health insurance plans. We talked about that. It's a big concern. I'll tell you, as a member of Congress who gets constituents who have problems with these plans, it's one of the top calls that we get that's really concerning. And also, just so you know, when people get on these plans, you can't just go back to Medicare. And we have people who, have horror stories about that. And just to give you an idea how extreme and radical this is, it renames the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Life. Right? Okay, let's go ahead into reproductive care.
Reporters, please note that there were groans in the audience.
It criminalizes abortion and bans abortion pills. And the way it does this, by the way, is it takes advantage of the Bostock law, which would claim it's pornographic to send these pills in the mail, and so when someone asked how do you implement some of this with constitutional protections, it finds ways to do this, and by the time you challenge it and overturn it, likely this would be in place.
And here in Wisconsin, we know that laws from the 1800s
Yes.
can come back and haunt us. Just saying.
It allows state bans on medically necessary abortions. It directs the CDC to surveil pregnancies. And this is part of that data collection that it's going to do on every single case in a state. It would limit fertility treatments, including IVF, so directly in contrast with the most recent statement by Donald Trump. And it allows employers to refuse to cover birth control on religious and moral grounds.
I'm trying so hard not to talk about all of this.
I know. And if there's anyone, what I love, and I'm going to use my line I said, what bigger contrast could there be in this congressional seat between someone who's an OBGYN on one of the most important issues of our time and someone who has a dinosaur for the logo of his business? Like, what bigger contrast do you need to know, right, than that? I'm just saying, right? All right. Climate.
If only they had IVF, that might still be around.
So climate. This is one where you heard very much in Wisconsin, clean air and clean water.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what party you belong to, you want clean air and clean water. But you don't get it if you dismantle the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And they want to do that and make it harder for them to take action against companies who are committing problems of pollution. They roll back our air and water protections for communities. They disband agencies that keep track of weather patterns, and they don't want to keep data anymore, which is a little scary, that the facts scare them. And it destroys natural habitats by expanding offshore oil and gas drilling on public lands and waters. And this is just, trust me, the smallest of samplings in each of these areas. Public education. So first of all, we said it recommends abolishing the Department of Education. I have served in Congress from the first term I was there. I was on the Education and Labor Committee, and now I serve on appropriations, but on the Labor, Human Services, Education Subcommittee. I've spent 12 years doing nothing but labor and education and human services in the most recent years under this. It is ridiculous to abolish the Department of Education, but this is how extreme the dogma is in Project 2025. It wants to cut federal loan programs that help students afford higher education. Look, I got to go to college because I came from a lower middle class family. I had Pell Grants and loans, and I paid back my loans. But without those, I wouldn't have been able to. And I think anyone who's smart enough and capable enough should be able to go to college. It goes back directly to roll back many of those protections that many of us have benefited from. It would make public schools even more dangerous for LGBTQ plus students by removing protections. And it was mentioned, it terminates Head Start. I have visited so many Head Start programs in my district. These are the programs that help many kids to have that chance to, in those crucial years, to be able to go to school and get the right start. And it doesn't care because it cares about the wealthiest and doesn't matter about everybody else. Immigration, there's a lot in here. I'm going to just give you highlights. It enables mass family separation and requires indefinite detention of immigrants. It requires the useless and wasteful wall to be built using taxpayer dollars, and it terminates legal status for 500,000 Dreamers. Dreamers are kids who may have come here with their parents when they were 1 month old, 2 years old, don't know the country they came from, don't know the language where they came from, but they're here. We have generally, in a bipartisan way, treated Dreamers differently than others who come here, and this would take away the legal status protections that we've had in place. Further, I guess I'll just add this if I can. We tried to deal with the border. I saw the billboards in town about the border, and this is the greatest hypocrisy I think that I've seen come out of the Trump campaign, because President Biden and Kamala Harris tried to address this with a bill at the Senate. They had a bipartisan bill with Republicans and Democrats supporting it that would have had more protections at the borders, but a legal pathway to citizenship for folks who are here with work in order to establish that legal citizenship. When I first got to Congress in 2013 was the last time we had a bill like this, and we had 69 bipartisan votes. When you hear 69 bipartisan anything these days, right? It had much of that in there and more. And Donald Trump said no. You're not going to do it in an election year. And the Republicans just rolled over in the House and the Senate, and we've done nothing. And just so you know, one real important fact. Right now, for decades, honestly, Congress has not done their job around the border. A president can't do that much. It really is going to be members of Congress who have to do the right thing and pass the right legislation. But the only way that's kind of open right now, and I'm taking a little aside on this, but I think it's worthwhile to share, is that you can come through under the asylum law. But the problem is not everyone really is here for asylum, but it's the only way you can kind of get in to the country for whatever reason that's mixed up in the law right now. So it takes, on average, 2 3/4 years for your case to be heard. Part of that bill, that bipartisan bill, would have shrunk that by hiring people that Republicans won't put money to hire to work the courts there to 3 months. So you might not take a 6-month journey to get here if you're going to be kicked out in 3 months because you weren't really here for asylum. But now if you can be here for 2 years and 3/4, people are still going to take that risk. So even things that we should be doing as a Congress that we couldn't get done because of Donald Trump is part of it. It's an aside. That's not Project 2025. All right. Discrimination. It removes civil rights protections for racial discrimination. It rolls back workplace and housing protections, enabling discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And it makes it harder for historically under-resourced communities to access Medicaid, Head Start, and other government programs. And I'll just add DEI programs specifically, although they might be coming up. We've seen them go after diversity, equity, inclusion programs, even in the appropriations process in the last 2 years. That and going after a woman's choice to make decisions about her own body and other things are already part of their practice. LGBTQI plus community. It demonizes the community, especially trans people. It stigmatizes trans youth, and it wants to take health care away from trans people. It encourages traditional family values with parents consisting only of a mother and father. And this is something that we really need to look at. By the way, it's defining family and some of the benefits you get as family. You have to have a father and a mother, and unfortunately that's not the situation. It's not about LGBT even, it's broader in family, and a lot of that is this and everything you hear out of J.D. Vance's mouth on this area. So this could really affect people's ability to get some benefits for their families.
You know, most of the babies that I deliver don't have married parents. That's not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
So that's inconsistent with the direction that they're going in.
And this is one of these little crosstabs. I've got this stuff because it's pretty insidious. It strips away non-discrimination protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. It weaponizes U.S. diplomacy to undermine global institutions and LGBTQI plus rights worldwide. And it imposes a ban on transgender service in the military, something that we had fought for years to have. There is no problem with it, but they're going after that. It's already in action, and that part I really want to stress. Even though this is their roadmap for the next administration, we're seeing this both in the fiscal year 24 budget that we just got done in March, 6 months late, and in the current one that we're not going to get done in time by September 30th. They've eliminated climate change fighting initiatives. They've cut diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. They implemented a nationwide ban on abortion, and they stigmatized trans youth and block medically necessary care to people. Just in these, and just so you know, they did all this in the 24, and 98.5% got removed at the end of the day. But if they have, it's because we had a Democratic Senate. If they had a House and a Senate and a White House, you don't remove 98.5% of the dumb stuff. It'll all be there. Impact on Wisconsin. I think this is really important. And this is just at the federal level. Because don't forget, everything that happens at the federal level, you've got the MAGA crew in the state legislature. This is going to have ripple effects. But it could raise taxes for the average Wisconsinite by $3,100. It could raise the cost of prescription drugs for up to almost 300,000 people in Wisconsin by eliminating that out-of-pocket Medicare drug cost limits that we put in place in the Inflation Reduction Act. The $2,000 cap annually would be removed under their ideas. It reduces coverage for 595,000 Medicaid enrollees, which again are, as you know, some of the poorest folks that need health care.
Most of my patients.
Most of your patients. And it would fire 2,641 teachers, affecting 31,000 students in the state of Wisconsin.
So it's going to raise taxes, make drugs more expensive, and kick people off of insurance.
Yeah, pretty much.
And fire teachers.
But I'll bet you some corporations are going to pay less taxes, and some people with their conservative dogma will have it. Finally, what can you do? And this is really, educate yourself at Neighbors. Thank you for being here tonight to kind of get some pieces of this, and this is why we're trying to take this on the road so people can have some actual information that, you've hopefully got a copy of that. I don't advise you read it unless you have severe insomnia problems, but at least some of the highlights are helpful. You can help on campaigns. I mean, we have state, legislative, and congressional candidates with us. And I'll tell you, and maybe this is probably not going to be the most popular thing in this room, but I'm going to say it. Reed Ribble was a very good friend when he served in Congress. He was a Republican, but he was a respectable person. And if you follow his Twitter, he's not happy with the direction of the current Republican Party at all. But today, your opponent, who I've never met, Tony, what's his last name? Weed.
Trump endorsed Tony.
Came and attacked me on. Trump endorsed, he attacked me on social media today. Said a bunch of things that weren't true. Said I want to defund police, and he put a clip that didn't say it at all. But my advice to him is no, don't defund police, like the Republicans have with the FBI and the DOJ. That's a bad idea because we need that law enforcement, and a bunch of other things. And that was his introduction. And I remember Reed. I mean, Reed, when I got elected, we went out to dinner. And we're still friends to this day, and we still communicate to this day. And he and I are leading a bipartisan effort to try to get anyone running for office to commit to accept the election results. You shouldn't need an initiative to do that, but that's the way it used to be and it should be, not just to have these extremists who are ideologues get elected. That's why we have a lot of work to do. And we only need 4 seats to pick up the House of Representatives. Obviously, the 8th district would be, and we have to keep Tammy Baldwin in the U.S. Senate. The Senate's really, the best result could be a 50-50 Senate, which means we have to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, because Tim Walz would be the deciding vote. And finally, again, 2 more links, and I'll just leave this one up here. Center for American Progress does really great analysis work. It's a think tank in Washington. They've got a whole thing exposing more about Project 2025. And Democracy Forward has a People's Guide to Project 2025. I just recommend both of these. This is easier to read than this, but we have page references on everything, right? You can find anything where we're talking about something, there's a page reference, and you can find it. And I just recommend those as a couple documents. So that's the formal part we wanted to do. Now I think we just want to open it up to questions and comments.
Questions.
So any questions, comments, whatever we can try to share, we'd be glad to try.
Carl.
My question is, corporations, the Koch brothers have been involved with many of these right-wing think tanks. Are the Koch brothers involved with the Heritage Foundation? Do you know?
I think they're involved with a lot of the 100 groups that are behind it, to be honest. Heritage is interesting because they, were one of the major sponsors of the RNC. And the first day, they had a full day teach-in for delegates at the RNC. But right now, they're trying to really distance everything on this. So it is much harder to, like I said, you can't buy a copy. I couldn't find one. I would much rather have done that than this, to be honest, because that's kind of heavy and a little hard to carry around. But there's a printed book that they had out there, no longer. But a lot of these groups are funded by folks who are going to benefit from the tax policy. And a lot of these folks, there's a book that just came out by 2 New York Times authors on Roe versus Wade, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which is really interesting. The authors spoke to some of us at a dinner one night, and they talked about how this has been going on for decades to get to this point. And a lot of these folks are the funders of these efforts that, as someone said, some of this goes back to Ronald Reagan, right? But put into this detail, into this current period where we are with MAGA elected officials, means this is the closest to reality this has ever been.
I was just going to mention the Federalist Society and how they influence the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And they've been around forever. I mean, I think every single judge that's on the Supreme Court has been, had their blessings. Now, it seems to me that I've heard this said about the presidential powers being expanded. So you got literally 2 groups You know, you got the Heritage Foundation, you got the Federalist Society, all saying the same.
And don't forget, one of their recent decisions said basically you can't prosecute a president for anything.
Right.
And if you give all the power to the president, and then they can never do anything wrong according to the Supreme Court, we're not looking like we've looked for, you know, several hundred years.
You definitely would be not giving any, opposing anything that he does.
Right, it'd be very hard.
And point out that it isn't just a Heritage Foundation. They got like about 40 different organizations underneath them, and they all.
Yeah, it's 100 organizations that are on the actual list, and I really should probably get a
Heritage
printout to go
Foundation.
through all of them.
And that's still available. You can still see
Yeah.
that on their homepage, and that's where I saw all these Christian organizations that I'm like, what in the world do they have in common with this? Like, where did they get that from? You know, so, and they're there. I mean, they're easy to see. Some of them I don't know their names, but they're very closely tethered to Heritage Foundation and Federal Society and all that other stuff. And then these Christian ones are doing the same thing. So I can't understand why they're signing up. That blows my mind.
Andy?
Why do you think it's so hard to combat the fact that this is obviously Trump's direction when it's literally just a continuation of what they're already doing in every single facet that you guys are describing?
Yeah, I mean, much of it is a continuation, right? But there's also, like, I don't remember them proposing previously 50,000 civil servants getting fired and putting in political appointees, right?
But sure they do. Well,
At
At the end of his first presidency.
not
Yeah.
just talking about it. They've got, he's done it in his own cabinet. He put in people with zero experience when he was in office the first time. This is just more of the same. It shouldn't be so hard to convince Republicans that he's going to keep doing what he's been doing.
I mean, you're in Marinette, you know? You know that there are a lot of low information voters.
Oh my
We're
God.
all engaged.
There's a lot of
But
low
how many times have you knocked on a door and someone
Yeah,
does not
it's bad.
understand, they don't read past the headline,
Yeah.
and they're tired,
Yeah.
and they're frustrated. And I can say, you know, in talking with people throughout the district, they're tired of the politics. They just don't even want to engage in it. So they just see this stuff on their Facebook feed, whatever. They're not even thinking about it. It's just going into their head, and they just believe it.
Right.
And that's why the work that you're doing, and you're doing, and you're doing, and Jane, and Christy, and Ryan, I know you're around here somewhere, getting to every corner of this district. Mark, we have not had candidates running in these state seats, in some of these seats, in over a decade, because the gerrymandering was profoundly bad for us up here. But these people are out knocking doors, talking to people, hearing from people, and teaching them.
And you are going to hear, because, again, these mailings, I'm assuming, are going to go across the state because it's by the Trump campaign. But explicitly trying to distance himself from Project 2025. Like, this really, to me, shows they know that this is a loser for them. And I've seen polling on most of the major issues that I showed, and they're almost all 70% opposition to the ideas that are here. So it's just making sure people understand, you know, what is in their roadmap, and in many cases, and I think some of these two might show you what we've already seen come through Congress and state legislatures that match up with this plan.
So I'm really interested in the bipartisan efforts to get more moderate Republicans on board, like Reed Ribble. Do you guys have a plan to make that bigger, to ramp it up, to...
It's a nationwide thing. Reed and I are just leading the effort in Wisconsin, and I think part of it is because we both, you know, Reed is, like I said, he was a very unique guy because he sat down, he's a conservative, what a real conservative is. And we could disagree on issues, but do it without being disagreeable. At the end of the day, there are so many more things that just advance good public policy for people you can get done. Those folks are kind of like fire-breathing flying unicorns, right? They don't exist a whole lot anymore. But what we're trying to do is just the simplest level, given what happened 4 years ago and January 6th that followed, is just ask people to accept the results of the election. I didn't think it would be a big push, but it has to be. So there's a group, a bipartisan or nonpartisan national group. Reed and I are leading the effort in Wisconsin, but in every state there are folks leading the effort. Again, trying to make sure that there's some accountability with elected officials so we don't run into a problem like we did 4 years ago and people say that the election's not valid.
Did you happen to catch Reed Ribble's comments on numerous media outlets over the past couple of months when he said that a Democrat can win this district? Did you hear that?
I heard
Yeah.
it pretty clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
listen to Reed too. He's a man of integrity, like you said. I mean, it's few and far between, but people will listen, and I am amazed at his clarity on that.
Yeah, even in Congress, he had a group, problem solvers, that kind of took a little bit of a weird turn. And he acknowledges they took a weird turn. But the whole idea was as simple as just having Democrats and Republicans work together and you agree you're gonna things you disagree on, but at least move forward on the things you can do. But just from watching this tweet today, someone coming out calling me, I've never even met the person, I don't even know their last name, I already forgot it. And, that's the initial response. I said, look, since Reed Rebel was so kind to me, I'm going to pretend you had a bad day. But by the way, please don't back defunding the police, because your Republican colleagues that you want to join have already tried to do that with the DOJ and the FBI, right? Just let him understand, we get that they've actually tried to do these things, and this rhetoric that they put out there just isn't true.
Mark, it's weed, like something you want to pull out.
Right?
And it's only legal in Michigan.
And his first name is Trump endorsed.
Yeah.
Trump endorsed weed.
Given, I'm looking at this crowd is here, no insult, but I'm looking at the 18 to 34-year-old that need to get this type of information. You said you're going around the state. What are you doing to infuse and get them to understand that this will be totally destroy their future?
Yeah, there's a bunch of social media and other efforts, as well as other members. Maxwell Frost, who is 26 in Congress, and I'm really proud to say I helped him in his primary 2 years ago, went down to Orlando, and he went in a 12-way primary. He's going all around the country right now, going to college campuses and talking about it. Some of my colleagues from Village iPol in Seattle just did a town hall, and I'll be honest, that's where I got the idea. When she had one, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. The only twist we did is let's take it around the state, let's take it on the road so more people can hear about it. But I think it's social media in particular. Even at the Democrat convention, you notice they did it with a comedian to really help deliver that to maybe other audiences that don't want to maybe talk about 920-page books, because little book clubs can be a little boring. So they're trying to make it in a way that people can digest and understand. But it is an important part, I think, of what we're trying to say, because it's so often, politicians, especially like Donald Trump, who aren't so familiar with always telling the truth, he can say whatever he wants to, but the connection of 140 of his administration officials and the work that they've done on this speaks, I think, louder to the average person, doesn't pass the smell test what he's saying, and all these mailings tell me how much he realizes he's in trouble if people find out about it.
I have a great idea.
Yeah.
Let's do a TikTok.
TikTok, okay.
Who knows how to make a TikTok? Does anybody know how to make a TikTok? Renee. Renee's going to have us make a TikTok.
Okay, afterwards we get it.
You're absolutely
She does really good at
Younger
it.
generation.
I like seeing your TikTok.
Lorianne.
My boys are.
I have read part of this before it was jerked off the internet. And it is so confusing to read. It was worse than reading my insurance policy.
Whoa.
And I worked for an insurance company, so it's bad. When I started to read this, I quickly got physically ill feeling, because to me this wasn't a political policy as much as it was a guide to how to be a dictator. And that's exactly what I see this policy as. What I want to know is, you talked about the Medicare aspect in this policy. I know what Medicare Advantage is and what it does. Has he said anything in this policy, because I gotta be honest, I didn't get that far, about what he wants to do with Social Security?
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because this is, I think, also equally important is to be completely honest about some of the myths that are out there. This talks in no way about changing Social Security, other than defunding some of the office, which will make you have longer times when you call to get help. The Republican Study Committee, which is the largest caucus in the House Republican caucus, 100 and some members, they have put out a policy statement that wants to raise the retirement age from 67 to 69. So a majority of the Republicans in Congress have said that, but that is not part of Project 2025. However, they would defund Social Security, so it'd be harder to get help But Medicare is explicitly talked about, and it explicitly says you will go on a privatized plan. And, you know, I think this is an issue, again, I've got a group now, we've got a group of nonprofit advocacy groups and a group of members that are really focused on this because we had so many constituent complaints from people who are on this. You know, if you're traveling and you're in California, you're on a network, you got to pay out of pocket. You don't with Medicaid, right? They won't always give you the care that your doctor wants to give you. They say you got to try this first, and then try this 3 months later, then 3 months later try this. And you know what? 6 months into a cancer diagnosis may not be the best depending on the cancer to be trying things, right? So this is why you want to have where Medicare takes care of that. There were some very smart lobbyists when that law was written that allowed them to use the name Medicare in Medicare Advantage. It should be Blue Cross Blue Shield Advantage, it should be Humana Advantage, but think about it. We don't let any other privatized entity. You can't be the United States Postal Service and pizza delivery, right? No one else can use a government name, but those lobbyists were very smart. And over half the people right now in the country are on Medicare Advantage plans. So there's a whole lot of other things around that. But what this says is that you will have to go on those plans, and that they're basically trying to get rid of Medicare as a government service.
Are they trying to make you purchase your own Medicare Advantage plan?
It would put you onto a privatized plan. But once you're on a privatized plan, that means you don't get the Medicare, the coverage you need, because you have to get prior authorization by a profit-making entity.
You have to wait
well,
for whatever. Like when I had to go through my treatments, and I needed, I don't know, something to make the white blood cells. I had to sit. I had to wait for the insurance company to say okay.
Yeah. No, and the problem is they turn down millions a year of care. And I think this is the statistic that is the one I can never get out of my head. When they get appealed, 85% of them are overturned. But 6 months down the road, what's happened to that condition for you, and what's your life expectancy at that point? So anyway, but that is what it says. So nothing explicitly about Social Security other than it would defund somewhat the program or the department and it'd be harder to get service. The Republican Study Committee, though, the biggest group of House Republicans, has recommended going from 67 to 69. And if you think about it, if you work with your hands or in the trades, your body already, 67 isn't doing it, much less 69. But it does explicitly go after your capacity to have Medicare as we know it.
One of the things to be remembered is what Trump did during his first term of office, which is every budget was to cut Social Security and Medicare's funding.
Yeah. Well, he does that through a whole bunch of agencies, is kind of shrinking them. And don't forget, that's the old Grover Norquist, reduce government to the size you can drag it in the bathtub and drown it, or I'm saying it a little wrong, but that was the statement that he used. And that aspect is still in here. But then when you take in the tax cuts and everything else, I mean, you're just going to have less dollars for services. And yeah, you can get rid of the Department of Education and have savings, but you won't have education in the same way. And that's part of it.
Well, they don't. Like what they want is after during the civil rights movement, where a number of states down south got rid of their public education and just funded, gave some people vouchers and such. They wanted, and we'll have an unequal, extremely unequal school system. If you have the money, you'll go to a good school.
Yes.
If you don't have the money, well, good luck.
Well, and the same is true of higher education, and that is explicitly talked about, as you mentioned in here. So.
Yeah. And they've been trying to drown higher education for years, especially here in Wisconsin.
In that book there, does it mention anything about completely opting out of Social Security and allowing you to invest in the...
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't touch Social. I'm guessing politically there's a reason why they didn't touch Social Security, because it is more than a third rail. Like, we know that you've paid into it all your life. People want to make sure it's one of the most popular federal programs. I think there's a reason they don't explicitly say it in here. I was a little surprised when the Republican Study Committee made this. Because that is a cut to Social Security. If you raise the age, it's a cut, right? Because you paid in, and you're going to have less of the ability to get your money back. that you paid into it. So.
It's not like the chapters are broken down into, here's where we're going to
Yeah,
raise your
here's
prescription
right.
drug prices, here's where we're going to take away the Department of Education. A lot of these policies are kind of coded, and you have to read between the lines, which is why these guides are so helpful, especially when you're having conversations with people, because you may talk to somebody who says, that's not really going to happen. It doesn't actually say that in there. Well, as you interpret, this is how this actually plays out.
Well, I think that they don't want to talk about the Social Security because the demographic of the Republican Party kind of looks like they have a foot in the grave. Like they're already retired.
I can tell you from calls we get, Social Security
Yeah.
and Medicare are two of the most popular
Yes.
programs the federal government offers, and that's why I'm a little surprised they went there. But one last thing, Medicare Advantage, it's twice as profitable as normal health insurance. That's why the companies love it, and that's why there is a reference to that.
Other questions?
We want to be courteous of everyone's time. We just wanted to take a little time to share what's in here with you all, and thank you so much for coming out on the day after Labor Day to talk about it. And let me just say this: thanks for everything you're doing with Kristen and the other candidates you had tonight, because it really matters. I spent 14 years in the state legislature, one of the very favorite jobs I've ever had. I served on the Joint Committee on Finance for 6 of those years, chaired it for 2 years. That's why I wanted to be on appropriations and what I'm doing now. But these things really matter to people's lives. When you get the calls for all the bad, this Congress, we passed 27 bills last year, the least since the Depression. For all the ineptitude, we still are able to help people through casework, and that's where we get the calls of someone who's not getting health insurance through their Medicare Advantage, or someone can't get their benefits, their veterans benefits, etc. We could still kind of navigate and do those things. So, and that's one thing I have not looked at, by the way, veterans benefits. Someone brought it up at the last town hall, and I have to have a chance to do that, but it hasn't been time with the Labor Day weekend to see what specifically might be in there. So, but thank you for all you're doing for these folks.
TikTok time, Renee. Let's go.
Okay, thank you for doing this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you so much.
You're welcome. And the slides will be getting out in some way at some point, so you can. But honestly, these other documents, people who are going to care about certain issues, and other issues maybe aren't as relevant to them. So just talk to the folks. You know how to cherry pick the things that your friends care about the most. So just please do that.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.